The lawyer had barely finished reading the will when my brother stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and smiled like he had just won a war. "The mansion goes to Thomas Whitaker," Mr. Bell said quietly. No one gasped. No one looked surprised. Not my mother, sitting perfectly still in her black dress. Not my sister, who pressed a tissue to the corner of one dry eye. Not my uncle, who had been whispering to Thomas since we arrived. They all knew. They had known before I walked into that room. I was the only person stupid enough to think my grandfather might have remembered me. Thomas turned around slowly, letting the moment stretch. His smile landed on me first. Not because he was happy, because he wanted to see my face when I lost. The mansion had been in our family for nearly 90 years, 12 bedrooms, 4 fireplaces, a glass garden room, a private library, old stone walls covered in ivy. Everyone in town knew Whitaker House, and now it belonged to him. The golden grandson, the family investment. The one who had never washed his own coffee cup but somehow inherited the house our grandfather had spent his life protecting. Then Mr. Bell cleared his throat. "There is one additional item for Claire." That was me, Claire Whitaker, the forgotten granddaughter. The room shifted. My mother looked irritated, as if even hearing my name was an inconvenience. Mr. Bell reached into a smaller folder and pulled out a plain brass key. Not gold, not antique, not important looking, just a key on a faded blue ribbon. "To Claire," the lawyer read, "I leave the North Boathouse." For 2 seconds, nobody spoke. Then my sister laughed. It was small, sharp, and cruel. "The boathouse," she said. "That thing is practically falling into the lake." Thomas didn't even try to hide his grin. My mother leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't make a scene." I hadn't said anything. That was the part that hurt the most. I was expected to be quiet before I even opened my mouth. Mr. Bell placed the key on the table in front of me. The mansion went to Thomas. The investment accounts went to my mother. The art collection went to my sister. The antique cars went to my uncle. And I got a rotten boathouse behind the trees, half hidden by weeds, where my grandfather used to disappear when the family got too loud. Thomas walked over and picked up the mansion folder from the table. "Well," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Grandfather always knew who could handle responsibility." My fingers closed around the brass key. It was cold. He leaned closer. "Don't worry, Claire. Maybe you can rent the boathouse to ducks." That was when my mother finally showed emotion. She smiled. Not much, but enough. And in that moment, I understood something I should have understood years ago. They hadn't come to mourn my grandfather. They had come to divide the body of his life, and they were pleased with the cuts. I stood up without crying. That seemed to disappoint them. "Congratulations," I said to Thomas. His smile twitched, like he wanted me angrier. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot." It didn't. I picked up the key and walked out before anyone could see what my hands were doing, because they were shaking. Outside, the December air hit my face so hard it almost felt merciful. The parking lot behind the lawyer's office was wet from morning rain, and my reflection trembled in the puddles between the cars. I made it halfway to my old Honda before I heard footsteps behind me. "Claire?" I turned. It was Mr. Bell. He was carrying the same leather folder he had used during the will reading, but now his face looked different, less professional, more troubled. "I'm sorry about how that happened in there," he said. I almost laughed. How it happened? I asked. You mean the part where my grandfather left me a shed and gave Thomas a mansion? Mr. Bell glanced back at the building. The North Boathouse is not a shed. It has raccoons, Mr. Bell. It also has a lock your grandfather changed 6 months before he died. That stopped me. The rain tapped softly against the cars. He changed the lock? I asked. Mr. Bell nodded once. He came to my office after he did it, alone. No driver, no family. He was very clear that no one else was to receive that key. I looked down at the brass key in my palm. It suddenly felt heavier. Why? Mr. Bell didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer and lowered his voice. Your grandfather said you were the only one in the family who still knew how to look at things without seeing a price tag. I swallowed. For the first time that day, the grief found a crack. My grandfather had never said things like that in front of the others. Around them, he had been stern, quiet, careful. But when I was younger, he used to take me down to the lake and let me sit beside him while he repaired old wooden boats. He would hand me a piece of sandpaper and say, "Most people only see what shines, Claire. Learn to look at what survives." I had forgotten that, or maybe I had forced myself to forget. Mr. Bell opened the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. This is not part of the official reading, he said. My breath caught. Then what is it? Your grandfather asked me to give it to you privately after the family left. I stared at the envelope. My name was written across the front in my grandfather's handwriting. Claire. Simple, firm, alive. I took it carefully. What's inside? I don't know, Mr. Bell said. He sealed it in front of me. I looked back toward the office window. Through the glass, I could see Thomas laughing with my uncle. My mother stood beside them, holding the folder that listed her investment accounts. They looked victorious. Mr. Bell followed my gaze. Claire, he said, whatever is in that boathouse, I suggest you see it before they do. A cold feeling moved through me. They? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. By the time I reached Whitaker House, Thomas was already there. Of course he was. His black Range Rover sat in the circular driveway like a declaration. The mansion rose behind it, huge and grey against the winter sky. Even in grief, even with the shutters closed and the fountain empty, the house looked powerful. That was its trick. It made people feel small. I parked near the old carriage path instead of the front entrance. The last thing I wanted was to walk through that front door and watch Thomas practice being lord of the manor. But he saw me anyway. He came out onto the steps with a glass in his hand. Champagne, at 2 in the afternoon. Come to say goodbye to the house? He called. I kept walking toward the trees. Just picking up what's mine? He laughed. That shouldn't take long. I didn't turn around. Behind the mansion, the property sloped down toward Lake Alden. In summer, the lawn was green and perfect, the kind of place where wealthy people pretended their lives were effortless. But in winter, the truth showed through. Dead branches, mud, cracked stone steps, rusted garden gates. The North Boathouse sat beyond a wall of pine trees, half hidden from the main lawn. I hadn't been there in years, not since the summer I was 22, when I asked my grandfather for help after my mother cut me off financially. I still remembered what he said. No. That was it. No explanation, no softness, just no. I had been too proud to cry in front of him, so I left. I worked nights at a pharmacy, days at a records office, and finished my degree one class at a time. For years, I told myself he had abandoned me too. Now, I wasn't sure. The path to the boathouse was worse than I remembered. Weeds clawed at my coat, wet leaves stuck to my shoes. A fallen branch blocked the last turn, and I had to drag it aside with both hands. Then I saw it, the North Boathouse. It leaned toward the lake like an old man refusing to sit down. The roof sagged on one side. The paint had peeled away in strips. One window was cracked. The dock beside it had warped so badly that half the boards pointed upward. From the outside, my sister was right. It looked worthless. I stepped closer. The new lock was there, heavy, modern, stainless steel, completely wrong for the rotten wooden door. My pulse changed. I took out the brass key. For a second, I just held it near the lock. Then I heard a voice behind me. "What are you doing?" I turned so fast I almost dropped the key. Thomas stood at the edge of the trees. His champagne glass was gone. His smile was gone too. "What does it look like?" I asked. "It looks like you're trespassing." I stared at him. "You heard the will. The boathouse is on mansion property." "The boathouse was left to me." "The land wasn't." That landed harder than I expected. He stepped closer, his expensive shoes sinking slightly into the mud. "You really should have paid more attention, Claire. Grandfather gave you the structure, not the surrounding estate." I looked at the boathouse, then at the key, then back at him. "You came all the way down here to tell me that?" "I came to make sure you understood boundaries." There it was, not concern, fear. He was afraid of something. I slipped the key into my coat pocket. "I'll call Mr. Bell." "You do that," Thomas said. "And while you're at it, ask him how much a collapsing boathouse is worth without access rights." He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You always wanted a piece of this family, Claire. Now you have one. Enjoy the mold." I walked past him without answering, but this time my hands weren't shaking. Because now I knew. The boathouse mattered. Thomas knew it, and my grandfather had known he would try to stop me. That night, I sat in my apartment with the sealed envelope on the table. I didn't open it right away. I made tea, forgot to drink it, changed clothes, changed back into my sweater, checked my phone 6 times even though no one had called. Then finally, just after midnight, I picked up the envelope. My grandfather had used thick cream paper, the kind he used for personal letters. The seal had been pressed flat with his thumb. Inside was one sheet. "Claire, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the house has gone exactly where everyone expected it to go. Let them enjoy that. The mansion is not the prize. It never was. Your brother will look at walls and see power. Your mother will look at accounts and see safety. Your sister will look at objects and see status. You must look where I taught you to look, at what survives. The North Boathouse contains something your great-grandmother protected, your father misunderstood, and your mother tried very hard to find. Do not trust anyone who tells you it is worthless. Do not enter the boathouse with Thomas present. Do not give your mother the blue ledger. And Claire, I am sorry, not for what I left you, for what I let them do to you. Grandfather." I read the letter once, then again, then a third time, slower. The blue ledger. My mother tried to find it. My father misunderstood it. My great-grandmother protected it. I sat back in the chair and felt the room tilt slightly. My father had died when I was 17. A heart attack, they said. Sudden, clean, final. After that, my mother changed, or maybe she simply stopped pretending. Thomas became the family heir, Meredith, my sister, became the family ornament, and I became the inconvenience, the one who asked questions, the one who noticed missing signatures, the one who remembered conversations people wished I would forget. I reached for my phone and called Mr. Bell. He answered on the fourth ring, voice rough with sleep. "Claire?" I read the letter. Silence. Then, "I thought you might." "What is the blue ledger?" Another silence, this one longer. "I was never shown it," he said finally, "but you know something. I know your grandfather amended his will 3 times in the last year. Each amendment made the mansion less important and the boathouse more protected." "What does that mean?" "It means he expected a fight." I looked at the letter again. "Do not give your mother the blue ledger." "My brother says I don't have access rights." "He would say that." "Is he right?" Mr. Bell exhaled. "Not exactly." That was not comforting. The boathouse sits on a narrow strip of land that was separated from the estate in 1941. Most people forgot because the family treated the whole property as one piece. But legally, the boathouse parcel is distinct. "So I own the land?" "You own the structure and the parcel beneath it." My grip tightened around the phone. Then Thomas lied. Thomas simplified. That's what lawyers call lying. That's what families call strategy. I almost smiled despite everything. "What do I do now?" "Go in the morning, take photographs of everything before you touch it. And Claire?" "Yes?" "If you find a blue ledger, do not bring it to my office yet." "Why not?" "Because I don't know who else has been looking for it." The next morning, I arrived before sunrise. The mansion was dark except for one light in the east wing. Thomas had probably stayed overnight, claiming territory. I parked half a mile away near the old service road and walked through the trees with a flashlight, my boots sinking into the wet ground. Every sound felt too loud, the crunch of leaves, the snap of twigs, the lake moving against the shore. When the boathouse appeared through the dark, I stopped and listened. Nothing. No voices, no footsteps, no Thomas. I unlocked the door. The metal clicked open with a clean, expensive sound. Inside, the air smelled like dust, lake water, and old varnish. My flashlight beam moved across the room. Ropes, canvas covers, broken oars, a rusted anchor, stacks of wooden crates, an old workbench near the back wall. For a moment, disappointment rose in me. It looked exactly like what everyone said it was, a forgotten storage room full of junk. Then I noticed something strange. No cobwebs on the workbench. Everything else was coated in dust, but not the bench. I stepped closer. There were scratches on the floor beneath it. Fresh scratches, as if the bench had been moved recently. My heart began to beat harder. I took pictures like Mr. Bell told me. The whole room, the crates, the floor, the lock, the scratches. Then I grabbed one side of the workbench and pulled. It barely moved. I pulled again, harder. The legs scraped against the floorboards. Behind it was a narrow cabinet built directly into the wall. No handle, no knob, just a small brass keyhole. I almost laughed. Of course. My grandfather had always loved things that required patience. I tried the boathouse key. It didn't fit. I searched the workbench drawers. Nothing. The crates. Nothing. An old toolbox. Nothing. Then I remembered the blue ribbon attached to the key. I looked at it closely for the first time. It wasn't just a ribbon. Something had been stitched inside the folded fabric. My fingers worked clumsily as I tore the thread loose. A smaller key slipped into my palm, blackened with age, tiny, almost weightless. I inserted it into the cabinet lock. It turned. Inside was a metal box, and on top of the box was a photograph. My grandfather, much younger, standing beside my father near the lake. Between them stood a woman I didn't recognize. She was elegant, maybe in her 60s, with sharp eyes and one hand resting on the shoulder of a little girl, me. I had no memory of the photo being taken. On the back, my grandfather had written, "She knew before any of us." I opened the metal box. Inside were 3 things: a stack of property documents, a bundle of old letters, and a blue leather ledger. For a full minute, I didn't touch it. The ledger looked ordinary, worn edges, cracked spine, a faded elastic band holding it closed. But the air around it felt charged, like it had been waiting longer than I had been alive. I took another photograph. Then I opened it. The first page was handwritten in neat, slanted script. Whitaker Family Trust, private record. Below that, not to be stored in the main house, not to be disclosed to Eleanor Whitaker. My mother. I stopped breathing. My mother's name was right there. Not Thomas, not some distant ancestor. My mother. I turned the page. The ledger listed properties, not the mansion, other properties, small commercial buildings, farmland, lake access rights, mineral rights, old rental homes, shares in a private holding company I had never heard of. Whitaker Maritime Holdings. Beside each entry were dates, signatures, transfer notes, and initials. Most of it meant nothing to me, until I saw my father's name, Daniel Whitaker. Then mine, Claire Daniel Whitaker. Then a fishery designation pending. My knees went weak. I sat down on an overturned crate and kept reading. Page after page showed something impossible. The mansion had never been the core of the family wealth. It was the symbol, the thing people photographed, the thing my mother hosted parties in, the thing Thomas thought made him powerful. But the real money had been somewhere else, quiet, hidden, protected. And according to the ledger, my grandfather had started moving parts of it out of my mother's reach years ago. Not to Thomas, not to Meredith, to a trust connected to my father, and possibly to me. A sound outside made me freeze. A branch snapped, then another. I closed the ledger and shoved it back into the box. Someone was coming down the path. I turned off my flashlight. Through the cracked window, I saw movement between the trees. 2 figures, one tall, one in a long, dark coat. Thomas. And my mother. I didn't move. The boathouse door was still slightly open. My mother's voice cut through the morning cold. "You told me she wouldn't come this early," Thomas answered, irritated. "I didn't think she had the spine." They were close now, too close. My mother stopped just outside the door. For the first time in my life, I heard fear in her voice. "If your grandfather gave her that ledger, everything changes." Thomas laughed quietly. "Then we make sure she never understands what she has." My hand tightened around the metal box. And in that moment, sitting in the dark with dust on my coat and my grandfather's secret against my chest, I finally understood. The mansion was never the inheritance. It was bait. And my family had just walked straight toward the hook. For several seconds, I couldn't move. Thomas and my mother were standing less than 20 feet away. The blue ledger sat inside the metal box in my hands, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the one who felt powerless. They were. I could hear it in their voices. Fear. Real fear. The kind people experience when they realize a secret they've spent years protecting might finally come into the light. My mother stepped closer to the door. "We need to know if she found it." Thomas sounded irritated. "And if she did, then we have a problem." "No," he replied. "She has a ledger. We have lawyers." That sentence told me everything. He still thought this was about money. My grandfather had been right. Thomas looked at the mansion and saw power. He looked at people and saw obstacles. He looked at inheritance and saw ownership. He never understood legacy. Their footsteps eventually faded. Neither of them entered. Neither of them found me. But the moment they left, I called Mr. Bell. His answer came immediately. "Tell me you found it." "I found the ledger." Silence. Then, "Don't bring it home." "What?" "Do not bring it home." His voice had changed. Professional, sharp, urgent. "Meet me at my office." I looked down at the pages. My mother knows about it. I assumed she would. And Thomas. I assumed that too. I took a breath. "What exactly is this?" Mr. Bell was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I never expected. "Claire, your grandfather wasn't hiding money." I frowned. "Then what was he hiding?" "The truth." 3 hours later, I sat across from him in his office. The ledger lay open between us, page after page, signature after signature, property after property. At first, it looked like accounting, but it wasn't. It was evidence. Evidence of transfers, manipulations, shell companies, trust amendments, backdated agreements. For years, my mother had publicly claimed she was protecting family assets after my father's death. According to the ledger, she had been moving them, slowly, quietly, strategically. Mr. Bell adjusted his glasses. "Your grandfather started documenting everything 14 years ago." "Why?" "Because he stopped trusting her." The room felt smaller. "What did she do?" He pointed to several pages. "After your father died, a number of family assets disappeared." I stared at him. "Disappeared?" "Legally transferred." I swallowed. "To her?" "Eventually." My stomach tightened. Every page I turned revealed another piece. Rental properties, commercial lots, investment partnerships, revenue streams. All moving, all changing ownership, all becoming harder to track. My grandfather had seen it happening, and he had built a paper trail. Then Mr. Bell opened one of the letters from the metal box. The handwriting belonged to my grandfather. "Claire, if you are reading this, then I failed to stop it while I was alive, but I can still stop it after I'm gone. Follow the records, trust evidence, not family." My eyes burned. For years I had believed he abandoned me. For years I believed he chose Thomas. I was wrong. He was preparing. The next few weeks changed everything. Not because of money, because of work, actual work, research, documents, meetings, audits, court filings. There was no magical victory, no surprise billionaire account, no hidden treasure chest, only evidence, boxes of it. My grandfather had spent years building a case, and he had left it unfinished. The first major breakthrough came from Whitaker Maritime Holdings, the company listed in the ledger. It wasn't dead. It wasn't worthless. And it wasn't small. It controlled several commercial properties along the lakefront, properties generating millions in revenue. Properties Thomas didn't even know existed. Properties my mother believed she controlled. She didn't. The trust did. And according to the amended documents, I was one of the beneficiaries. Not because my grandfather suddenly loved me more, because my father had designated me before his death, something my mother never expected, something she had spent years trying to reverse, something she never successfully completed. For the first time, the puzzle made sense. That was why she feared the ledger, not because it contained wealth, because it contained proof. The lawsuit started 2 months later, not by me, by the trust. The trustees reviewed the evidence, the auditors reviewed the transfers, the accountants reviewed the records, and one by one questions appeared. Questions my mother couldn't answer, questions Thomas couldn't explain, questions that had actual documentation behind them. The family that once treated me like an inconvenience suddenly wanted conversations, meetings, phone calls, understanding. My mother called 23 times in 1 week. I answered none of them. Thomas sent emails, long ones, polite ones, then angry ones, then desperate ones. I ignored those too. For the first time in my life, they couldn't control the narrative. Facts were doing the talking. 6 months later, the mansion wasn't looking quite so impressive. Legal fees, investigations, frozen accounts, public scrutiny. The symbol of power was becoming expensive, very expensive. And then came the hearing. The one everyone attended. Family, lawyers, trustees, accountants, reporters, even distant relatives who suddenly remembered they cared about family history. Thomas sat across the room, still confident, still polished, still trying to look untouchable. Until the documents were presented. The room changed. You could feel it. Every page removed another layer of certainty. Every signature created another problem. Every record answered another question. And by the end of the day, something became obvious. The story my family had been telling for years wasn't true. Not legally, not financially, not morally. My grandfather hadn't left the mansion to Thomas because he trusted him. He left it because Thomas wanted it. That was the difference. The mansion was bait, a shiny distraction, a trophy. While everyone fought over the visible prize, the real legacy remained protected, exactly where my grandfather wanted it. A year after the funeral, I stood at the lake again. The North Boathouse looked different now. Fresh paint, new windows, repaired dock. Not because it became valuable, because it mattered. The old workbench remained exactly where it had been. I kept it. The hidden cabinet too. Some things deserve to stay. The mansion? Thomas eventually sold it. He couldn't afford to keep it. The taxes alone were crushing. The buyers turned it into an event venue. People now rent it for weddings. Ironically, it finally became useful. My sister moved across the country. My uncle stopped returning calls. And my mother spent years blaming everyone except herself. Some people never change. That's punishment enough. A few months later, I received one final package from Mr. Bell. It contained a single letter, the last one he had been instructed to deliver only after everything was resolved. I opened it alone. Claire, if this letter reaches you, then you already know the truth. The mansion was never the inheritance. It was the test. I knew exactly who would chase it. I also knew exactly who wouldn't. You spent your entire life being underestimated. That can become a weakness or an advantage. Most people spend their lives looking for treasure in obvious places. You never did. That is why you found what mattered. I am proud of you. Love, Grandfather. I read those words 3 times. Then I sat quietly beside the lake. The same lake where he taught me to sand old wood. The same lake where everyone thought the inheritance ended. The same lake where the truth had been waiting all along. And I finally understood something that took me years to learn. The people who spent their lives chasing symbols ended up losing everything. The person who followed the truth inherited something much larger than money: freedom. And unlike the mansion, nobody could ever take that away.